Throughout our history, we have encountered these forces in various forms, our latest threat being COVID-19. But what's worse than the circumstances themselves are the emotions that emanate along the way. Fear. Fear is often contemplated as the fiercest of all these emotions, not only because it installs a barrier of limitations, but also the very fact that it can creep from any corners, revolving from minuscule worries to something that can drain the last remnants of hope. I remember a time when I was around 7 or so. Despite being enchanted by the world, there was an aspect that I found immensely daunting: speed and height. Although I was comfortable with either of these elements, the grey zone between them was where my fear reverberated. I've been told that when we visited carnival rides, especially the scramblers, my brother would beckon me to come along, and I would. Everything will be on cloud 9 up to the point the ride actually begins swirling around. Instead of relishing the movement of the cabin, my response was to scream, with tears flooding my eyes and calling out to my parents, "Mama, Dad, where are you?" The coordinator would then be intended to terminate the ride midway so that I could creep back to the sanctuary of my parents. Even in pools, I would find myself standing at the tip of water slides, and I would stand there for what felt like eternity, unwilling to take that leap. Despite my family's assurances and encouragement, I always stood amidst this chaos within myself, as the images of the gushing waters coiled and suffocated my ribs. You see, there were only two possible methods out: either take the leap or revert to where you came from. And often my answer would be circling back to capitulating to my fears. That was until one point that changed the course of how I perceived confrontations. A new water theme park at our proximity had just commenced with several interesting rides and stalls, but there was one that held the dominance from the rest. An elongated water slide that began life from its very peak and ushered waters through its enclosed tunnel. From within, a sudden sense of determination, a sense to prove myself began rising. I've been concealing myself all this while, but this could not go on. If there was a place, any place, where I could prove my fears wrong, this was it. And so I asked my dad to accompany me for the leap. Climbing the stairs to my fate. Every heartbeat felt as though a wild animal was trying to escape its chest. It was finally time. Getting hold of our two-seater raft, we soared through the trickling waters. It wasn't that bad. I even began to appreciate the tumultuous pace of the waters. It seemed to me that the fear boiling up inside me all this while had created these delusions. Even the rushing raft didn't seem to intimidate me any longer. Without notice, our raft's motion ceased. I watched uncertainly at my dad, and the fact dawned me. Were we stuck? Thrusting and scrunching the raft, we desperately tried to get into motion, though in vain. It was as though the slide detested my accomplishment, and therefore tightened its grip around the raft. It seemed to mock, "This is all your fault, you shouldn't have tested your fears." But my dad was beside me, and hearing a propel at the beginning of the slide, he assured that another one would be coming along, which would feel the adequate force to escape. And so we waited. At my final stance from panic, something hit us. It was the raft of a couple. Well, turns out my dad was right. It did push us forward. But a fact that probably slipped from his thought was the way in which we would be continuing our journey. Well, let's just say, instead of the widespread means of traveling upright, we traveled face down, with my nose squashed against the base of the ride. Those behind us tried to righten our posture, but the waters decided against it. And so the rest of the journey was filled with the rushing waters going past my eyelids and scrubbing against my palms. The landing was the clumsiest of it all, as I was literally swallowed by the pool. Flapping my hands, I tried to imitate the movements of a fish, but that did not help. I was only brought back to my senses when my dad's hand pulled me back home. The event changed everything. For sure, my fears of speed and height disappeared, but what thrilled me more was that I confronted them all. The fear, and better still, the sudden jolt of events without breaking down. As Henry Ford once remarked, one of the greatest discoveries a man makes, one of his greatest surprises, is to find out what he can do he was afraid he couldn't do. And at that instant, I figured it out. Likewise, COVID-19 is such an opportunity to assert it. Our previous conceptions of global disasters and pandemics were all centered around these meager facts that we had read from documentaries and textbooks. Sure, we've seen them in museums, but they were all like myths, something that is known yet irrelevant in current times. And so when we were hauled into this adversity all of a sudden, we weren't able to fathom our surroundings. Instead, we were forced to adapt to the drastic changes that were happening across the globe. With no social gatherings, no meeting friends, no hands-on learning experiences. Before, there was a time when I used to cherish meeting to others and talking to them. But those emotions were now plagued with uncertainty. Did they have COVID? Were they perfect just now? Even the groceries were stocked at the corner of our houses for days before they were handled. And wearing masks and gloves suddenly rose to the spotlight. I mean, the last time I remember wearing them were for our school Makers Day program. And so fear of what life will become suddenly slithered from the shadows. It seemed to me that we were simply chained in this invisible cage, suffocating and inescapable. Nevertheless, we have crossed our path with a plethora of trailblazing achievements. Unlike previous times, where turmoil and competition sparked between nations, a thread of unity was tied. We found a world that was willing to collaborate with one another to ascertain and mass-produce vaccines for the benefit of more than just citizens, more than just residents, more than caste, more than religion, but rather for the entire human population residing across the globe. A key milestone that has drastically plummeted the number of cases, but most importantly, deaths. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. These prominent words were stated by Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese writer who provided insights into the field of philosophy. Our journey of recovery should not be buffed with hiding from the virus or losing control of our whereabouts. When the disease rampaged across the UAE at the start, with cases peaking at around 3,000, we all panicked. Locking ourselves from the world, we surrendered our life and installed lockdowns. After these years of revelation, though, we're trying to avoid those hasty reactions. On the contrary, our mindsets have widened to recognize the necessary measures while still having glimpses of joy. A thought-provoking event that crossed my frame recently was the action of a 4-year-old child. When his toy car accidentally stumbled onto the floor, he didn't simply pick it up or let it remain. Instead, he made sure that both his hands and the toy car was immaculately cleansed with sanitizer. It's a wonder to see how far we've come, to realize that even the smallest of children are able to recognize their duty, regardless of knowing its true meaning. The boy could have simply fiddled with the toy car again without any of those measures, but he did not. He could have forcefully disconnected his cherished bond with that toy car and let go, but he did not. He held to his interest while keeping him and those around safe. On another note, our journey of recovery should not have the ultimate goal of returning to that pre-COVID standards. No, what we should all strive for is to emerge victoriously, to emerge with a greater scope of understanding than our pre-COVID ones, by equipping the world with a sustainable, stronger, and more resilient future. Eventually, we'll reflect on all these years from a time where masks and gloves are incognizant, with families and friends together. And I hope at that instant, we'll reflect in celebration and remembrance of all the sparkles we've seen in these shattered glass. This is not the end of it. This is definitely not the end of our long list of atrocities. But I can tell you one thing though. We will surpass and overcome every trial that is hurtled across our shore. Because that's who we are. Our species has a prime talent. It's that we never let it go. We never let it rest because of our love for one another. Our predecessors had to overcome the challenges of nature and weather in order to survive. And if they hadn't improved their methods, do you think we'll be able to evolve to such an extent as we are today? In every generation, evidence of courage and resilience can be spotted. And that runs through our veins as well. And that's the essence that's going to strive our path forward. Thank you.